You're listening to the Soils for Life podcast. I'm Ellie Court, CEO at Soils for Life, and today on the podcast, a conversation with Gabe Brown. Gabe's a farmer and educator from North Dakota, where he and his family run Brown's Ranch, a 6,000-acre operation that's become a model for regenerating land. After years of tough seasons and crop failures, Gabe recognised a need to build a farming system that works with nature instead of against it. Through no-till, cover crops, diverse rotations and integrating multi-species livestock, he's restored soil health, boosted resilience and almost eliminated the need for synthetic inputs. Beyond his own farm, Gabe's helped thousands of farmers transition to regenerative practices through his work with Understanding Ag, the Soil Health Academy and his book Dirt to Soil. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Gabe Brown. Very nice to meet you. How's your day been so far? It's late afternoon, right?
Yep, it's good. Just busy, but that's the way I like it. Keeps me out of trouble.
Yeah, very good. So, yeah, what is a typical day for you these days? Is there a typical day?
Yeah, well, when I'm not traveling, it's in front of a laptop here it's not uncommon for me to do 14 to 16 hours of Zoom meetings and, working with our team and spend a lot of time talking to CEOs, board of directors of large companies and brands and, just trying to educate them as to regen ag and what it is and why it's important. And
Yeah.
who knows? Every day it's just like nonstop. So it's all good.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a change from where you would have started out, right? I mean, sounds like you're not out on the ranch nearly so much as you once would have been.
No, we turned it over to our son nearly 8 years ago now. And just a couple of years ago, we built a new house and moved. So, because he was finally getting married, so they needed to be in the main farmhouse. So he's handling that, and I'm just herding cats, I think, is what I describe it as.
Yeah. I think a lot of people know you through Brown's Ranch and through your book. And I mean, how would you describe the approach to farming at Brown's Ranch currently? What does that look like these days?
Yeah, and I would describe Brown's Ranch as one of working with nature instead of against her. And it's very hands off from the standpoint we don't try and dictate what nature does, what nature provides. That'll be sufficient for what we need. And then it's just a matter of how do we integrate all of our different species of livestock appropriately into that. And then do some grain farming. So do grow some cash crops, not a large extent, but enough to feed the animals and produce some seed. But it's one of not putting on a lot of synthetics and not trying to outproduce our environment, because I think that's one of the real challenges and issues we have in agriculture. It's just mankind trying to impose his hubris on nature, thinking that we can dictate everything. And so it has all these negative ramifications when we do that. And we're trying not to do that.
And you said earlier, we work with what nature provides. I expect a lot of producers might come back and say, well, nature doesn't provide enough for me to make a living. How do you tend to respond to that?
I tend to respond to that from the standpoint, it's up to us then to learn to work with her. And I think one of the things that we see in production agriculture, we're planting monocultures by and large. That in and of itself is against nature. Okay, we're trying to push, so to speak, production just for optimum yields instead of optimum nutrient density and production that is in the capability of what nature's providing that year. For instance, we go so often in production agriculture, farmers put on copious amounts of synthetic fertilizers and other amendments trying to get higher and higher yields, not even considering that oftentimes those synthetics are antagonistic to soil health. And they're actually burning through more carbon than nature can cycle in a given growing season. And so their soils are going backwards. Why? Just because they're chasing yield? And I would contend I'll take profit over yield any day. And I would contend that our system is much, much more profitable as compared to the quote unquote conventional system.
Mm, mm. I'm keen to dig into some of those things a bit more, but before we leave the ranch, like what does the team look like now at the ranch? Who's there? What's the setup and how does it all
Yeah.
work?
So the ranch is approximately 6,000 acres, comprised mostly of perennial grazing land. On it, at any given time, there'll be 750 to 800 head of beef cattle, maybe 400 sheep, 400 plus head of hogs, 1,600 laying hens. There'll be a lot of bees for honey, be growing different cash crops and cover crops growing. Cover crops are there primarily for soil health and to run finishing animals on. Cash crops will be anywhere from a polyculture species such as barley, oats, flax, and peas grown for feed for the poultry and hogs. All the labor on the farm is our son Paul, his wife Jasmine. They have one part-time hired man who helps move the livestock. And then during summer months, we have only about 110 frost-free days where we're at, so things are pretty compressed. Paul usually has one other part-time person during that period. But that's it, and all the products are directly marketed to consumers. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot going on, and they're a little bit busy, but that's good. Keeps them out of trouble.
Yeah, and it's a complex enterprise with lots of different parts to it, even just on the farm, let alone the direct marketing side of things. But the team's pretty small and efficient. Some people might not understand how that can be.
Yeah. And I should have added one more. My wife does go out there at least once a week and help some package orders and that. So people say, well, man, they're working too hard. And yeah, they do work hard. It must be just 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, I say, look at all the things we don't do on the farm, okay? We don't apply synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides. You're saving all that time. We don't have to vaccinate the animals for disease. There's no need to. They're healthy. There's all these things that other farms do that we really find unnecessary to do. Okay. Now we're moving the animals daily during the spring, summer, and fall. During the winter, maybe once a week they get moved. But that really doesn't take that much time. You can move 800 head of beef animals in half an hour easily. So it's not that time consuming.
Amazing. So you've already talked a bit about soil health. What does soil health mean to you?
I don't focus strictly on soil health as much as I do regenerative agriculture. And I like to define regenerative agriculture as farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, beginning with all life within the soil and moving to all life above the soil. And I think that's all encompassing. So it takes into account soil health, which is critically important in the foundation, but it also expands above that because, of course, it's plants and photosynthesis that help build and drive soil health. And so we need to start there, but it also encompasses all the other biodiversity of plant species, animals, insects, and mankind and our interaction with it. So I look at it today as much more than strictly soil health.
Mm, mm. But I guess in some ways, yeah, soil is part of the foundation and
Mhm.
a proxy maybe for that broader ecosystem health. If the soil's doing well, the rest tends to follow.
Absolutely. And it's also a proxy to our health. We're doing some really groundbreaking work. It's a team of scientists that are doing it. We just help out a little bit, where we're comparing ecosystems side by side, farms that are going down the regenerative journey, and then farms adjacent to those that are quote unquote in the conventional mindset. And we're looking at soil microbiology diversity. We're looking at plant species diversity, animals, insects, looking at inputs into those systems. And then when we're producing, a grain, fruit, vegetable, or pastured protein, taking those and analyzing them using a mass spectrometer to look and identify over 2,500 phytonutrient compounds. And what scientists are finding is that the array and quantity of those phytonutrients is directly related to the diversity of soil biology. And of course, the soil microbiology, the diversity of that is directly related to the diversity in the ecosystem, plants, animals, insects. So I really think that this is going to be key in the future of agriculture, that we have to get back to using food as preventative medicine. And in order to do that, we have to understand these phytonutrient compounds and just how critically important they are, not only to soil function, ecosystem function, but then inevitably to our own health. And so that's really exciting to me. That I think is the next frontier, so to speak, as we talk about soil health and ecosystem health. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean to us as society? And then how can we, as land stewards, help to ensure that we're producing these?
Yeah, that's a really exciting area. It sounds very similar to some of the work that I've heard Dan Kittredge and Stefan Van Vliet and others talk about. Are you working with them?
With Dr. Van Vliet, yes,
Yeah,
and his
yeah. Ah, brilliant. And is that work being done on the properties you or your family are involved in managing, or other properties, or a bit of both?
Yeah, all the above. And one of the companies that I helped found is called Regenified, and Regenified is a certification verification company. And Regenified has an agreement with Dr. Van Vliet and Utah State University. So any of the farms that are certified Regenified have the ability to do this nutrient testing. And so we're building out that database. One, because we think it's critically important for everyone's future, but also to help prove out that these regenerative practices have a positive impact on the food that we eat.
Brilliant. And what are you finding so far? Is it still quite early days with those studies?
Yes, but it isn't. What's being proven is exactly what we expected all along, exactly what those of us who are longtime practitioners have known. And because we see it in the health of the animals, we certainly can taste the difference in the products we grow in and on healthy soils. So I don't think it's earth shattering, but I think it's science that's sorely needed and needs to catch up with where we're at.
Mm.
And then we got to get it out to the public, out to the medical community, et cetera.
I'm keen to hear a bit more about Regenified and what led to the founding of that company, and how you see that fits into the bigger picture of supporting more agriculture to go in this direction.
Realized that for years, I've always kind of been anti-certification, so to speak, for the fact that I think that we should have a relationship between the farmer and the consumer. That should be as direct relationship as possible. We need to know where our food comes from. We need to meet our farmer and be comfortable with the practices that they employ. Well, what I saw over time is that there's a lot of greenwashing taking place. Farmers, brands, companies we're saying, oh, they're regenerative. Oh, we're sourcing our products from farmers who are using these regenerative practices, and understand that myself and others involved in regenerative agriculture out on these farms all the time. And we're going, that's not regenerative. That's not driving ecosystem processes. That's not providing clean air, clean water. It's not taking carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it back in the soil. And so, approximately 4 years ago, Dr. Alan Williams, who's my partner in Understanding Ag, myself, Doug Peterson, and Salar Shimarani came together and said, okay, we have to try and do what we can to ensure that we're really helping to empower farmers, giving them the data that is showing that they are or are not moving down the regenerative path. We need to give brands that certainty that they're sourcing products that are truly regenerative. And then we need to give consumers the confidence that when they purchase a certain product, yes, they are doing the right thing. They're not only supporting that farmer, helping them further down the path, but they're also supporting the community at large, helping to do all these ancillary benefits for society. So we formed Regenified, and yes, that's a made up word. It's just easier to get trademarks and that way. We have the most comprehensive verification process in the industry. There's over 85 different tests and data points, everything from soil microbiology to water infiltration rates to proving out that the principles, rules, and processes are being carried out. We're the only USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, Food Safety and Inspection Service. We're the only label in the US that can put regenerative on the label, and the only one so far that has gone through the rigors of that process and been approved. And so we want these to be the gold standard, so to speak, in regenerative ag. And by the rate at which we're growing and the interest we've received, it's a bit overwhelming, but it's a good thing.
So, can you describe that growth and how fast it's growing? What types of producers are you finding wanting to go through this process? Where is that growth happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. And right now, simply because it is very rigorous. For instance, if you have approximately 1,000-acre farm with 50 fields, it'll take a verifier 3 days to do the verifications on your 1,000-acre farm. And these are annual verifications that are done. Now, one of the things I should mention about Regenified, it's not just checking boxes. The farmer can't just sit down and say, yeah, I plant a cover crop. Yeah, I reduce tillage. Yes, I have diversity. I'm regenerative. No, you have to have that proven out through all these test data points, but then you have to continuously improve. You have only 3 years to move to the next tier, and we have 5 different tiers in Regenify, because true regeneration does not stop, it continues. And we want to make sure that the farmers are continually advancing in improving not only for their benefit, but the benefit of all. Now, how does that look like, and how big? We started in the United States. We're across, right now, we're in 14 different countries, primarily North America and Europe. In saying that, if there's products that are being used and sold into the North American or European markets, for instance, maybe it's coffee from Latin America, maybe it's cocoa or something from Africa, we can go and verify those. We're getting quite a bit of interest from Australia now. I would envision that in the near future, we'll be moving over there also. The array of different commodities and landscapes that we're verifying are everything from grains and proteins such as beef and lamb and pork and eggs, but also timber. It's also fiber products such as cotton, perhaps. There's just no end. Anything that's grown and raised agriculturally speaking, we're going to have the ability to verify.
Is there a typical type of producer that's signing up, and do they have similar motivations for doing so?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it varies. I'm talking in generality here, and I don't mean to upset anyone, but in generality, farmers are very good at producing things, but they're terrible marketers. They don't spend that much time marketing. And the greatest return on time and investment always has been, always will be marketing. So what Regenify does, it empowers that farmer and gives them the facts that can help them sell their product, because they can go to that supply chain, that brand, and say, hey, you're trying to resource regeneratively grown wheat, for instance. Here's the data and facts, what I'm doing. And I can back that up, and I have the story behind it. That's worth something. And right now, we're seeing very good premiums being paid for these regeneratively grown and raised products, simply because there's not enough people out there who are going through the rigors and backing it up, being able to show, yes, I am growing it in a regenerative manner.
Yeah. And with those brands, have you seen brands willing to step in and support their supply chain, the producers they purchase from? Is that happening?
Oh, absolutely. And understand what's the most important thing to a brand. It's a consistent supply of the high quality product, right? They also like the stories that farmers can provide because that helps them in marketing. Okay. And it's all about dollars to them. So, what we're seeing often is those brands coming in saying, we want to source regeneratively grown and raised products. If they already have an existing supply chain, which most of them do, then we work with their supply chain, go in and verify them. Okay. If they don't and just want help sourcing, we can do that too, because Regenified has a whole cadre of producers who are growing a wide variety, growing and raising a wide variety of different products. So we can help them there also.
Yeah. I've got one other question about the certification system, and then I'm keen to shift to talk a little bit about farmer education and what you've seen that works there. But in terms of the verification system, we experience this in Australia, and I'm sure you're well aware and probably experience the same. Uh, Good seasons, bad seasons, and the health and function of the landscape can really fluctuate with the seasons. And some of those metrics that you're measuring as part of the verification system might go backwards for a year or 2 years or even longer. How is that built into the verification approach and that ideal of always, in the
Yep.
medium term at least, moving forward?
Yep. Fully understand. And having just gone 3 years of very severe drought in our environment, I'm fully familiar with the stall on improvement, that happens during those periods. That's why the principle of context is so important and where it comes into play. So the contingencies are wrote into the protocol that in terms of drought or fire or some natural disaster, okay, you can't expect improvement during those periods, and you're not going to get kicked out of the program because of
Yeah.
that.
So I just wanted to switch to talk a little bit about farmer education, and you've been involved in helping lots of other farmers to build soil health, build ecological function. What have you found really works well?
When my partners and I started understanding ag nearly 8 years ago, we did so because of what I had said earlier. Farmers cannot implement what they do not understand. I didn't understand anything about, the four ecosystem processes back 30 years ago. I've got a couple of college degrees in agriculture. They never talked about the energy cycle, the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, biodiversity. They just didn't in any of those course instructions. But yet, those are key to ensuring profitability and resiliency on any farm or ranch. So, what we do is go in and help educate. Like, one of the basic things that each farmer or rancher needs to know is, how is a soil aggregate formed? Because that aggregate drives the water cycle, it drives the nutrient cycle. You have to be able to form soil aggregates. Yet, if I'd walk into a room of 100 farmers and ask them how soil aggregates form, I'd be surprised if I get 3 correct answers. Yet it's just so foundational. So we start taking the farmers where they're at, preferably on their own farm, on their own field, shovel in hand, showing them this. We can show them, is your soil well aggregated? Is it compacted? Do you have good interaction between biology and the plant along that rhizome sheet? You show them and then educate them along the way. And then I think one of the reasons we've been so successful, and we're now consulting on over 36 million acres, is the fact that we're very, very good at increasing profitability for our clients. And you do that, you take them where they're at, and you start transitioning them from a system that's highly reliant on chemicals to one that's reliant on biology. And you work with them according to their aversion to risk. And what happens, you know, we have some farmers who, okay, I'll try it on 5 acres, but it's got to be behind the hill where none of the neighbors will see. And then you got the next farmer who says, makes sense to me. Let's just go for it. Do it on all our acres, you know? So you work with them in their context to move them down this path according to and at the rate at which they're educated. And that really helps ensure success.
Are there examples of farmers you've worked with that really stick out to you of how they've shifted to a regenerative approach to farming, and were there particular aha moments or turning points for them, or was it a more gradual process? Like what are the examples that stick in your mind?
I've got many of them. We work with a lot of clients, but let me give you this one as an example. So late in the year of 2018, I had a call from an individual. He was in his early 40s and had been farming all rented land, approximately 4,500 acres. He was already no-till. I had pretty decent crop diversity, grown about 7 different cash crops. But he told me, he says, Gabe, I'm getting by. We're making a little money, but he said most of the money just comes in and goes right back out for inputs. And he said, I don't feel good about what I'm doing when I'm out there applying chemicals. He said, I'm really interested in the regenerative path. So I had him and his wife came to one of our 3-day soil health academies where we teach the basics of regen ag. And then we started working with them on a plan. First thing we did when we developed a plan to diversify the crop rotation a little more, we also wanted to integrate cover crops where appropriate. Now, realize, as I said, this operation does not have any livestock, so it wouldn't be for grazing, but there's times I thought when we harvest a cash crop early, we could still get a cover crop growing and capture some solar energy. So he started to educate himself. That spring, then we did proper soil testing, showed him, okay, here's the biology you have in your soil. We need more in order to drive the natural nutrient cycle. We started backing him off appropriately on some of the synthetic nutrients because he was over applying them. He liked that. It saved him money immediately. And then it really kicked in when he started harvesting that summer. When he started taking off a crop, he would go in the next day and seed a diverse cover crop. Okay, so there was something growing. Okay, that's how we started down the path. Then the next year, we started to remove the insecticides, no more seed treatments, no more fungicides, because we're really focused on the mycorrhizal fungi component. Okay. Then we started to back off on the post-emergent herbicides. So we're saving them money, backing off where we can. Profitability is increasing. Well, fast forward to about a year ago at this time, he called me up and he was going to be in my hometown, wanted to stop and see me. And realized that I talked to him multiple times per year as we developed his farm plan and that. But he stopped in and saw me and he said, Gabe, I want to thank you because here's where I'm at today. He said, 5 years ago, we were barely getting by. He said, just last month, I purchased 320 acres of land and paid cash for it. He said, I had the money in my account to pay cash. So you're talking over $1 million worth of land. And he had the money to pay cash. And he said, now I'm profitable every year. And he said, the thing that excites me the most, though, is my 2 teenage children now want to come back and farm when they get through with their education. And to me, it's what better testament than, that's true regeneration when you're going to be able to bring the next generation back. So that's
Yeah.
just one story that stuck out. And he's starting to integrate livestock. He's now become even diversified his crop rotation even more, starting to really focus on marketing and making marketing a big part of what he does. And so I can tell you more stories like that, but you see them grow in their minds where they suddenly get it. They understand that that seed treatment they're putting on is not only killing that pest insect, it's killing all the beneficials that would help them. So we need to stop that. That fungicide treatment is killing much more than just that fungal disease. And they start thinking holistically. And that's really a joy to see.
Yeah, what an amazing turnaround. And how did he feel along the way? Were there moments where he was hesitant, where you were saying, "Oh, we can maybe back off on this now," and he was nervous about that?
I have a great story with that. He called me one day and he was pretty shook up. And he said, Gabe, I got to tell you the story. He said, I was out scouting my crops. It was a dry year and grasshoppers were really an issue. And he said, the grasshoppers were moving into one of my fields. And he said, I was debating if I should just call the local agronomy center and have them come and spray insecticides on that crop to kill the grasshoppers. But he said, I just couldn't do it. So I decided to go scout a few more fields. And he said, I did. And on the way home, he said, I drove by that field and it was covered with birds. He said the birds had descended on it to consume the grasshoppers. And he said, right then and there, I knew this is about something much greater than myself. This is about the ecosystem. And he said, enough birds converged on that where did it totally eliminate the grasshoppers? No. But he said it didn't. I certainly wasn't going to go spray for them. So that was just a great story on
Yeah,
how, and he was visibly taken by that,
yeah.
and we actually wrote up a testimonial about it.
Well, it's an amazing turnaround, isn't it, from what certainly in Australia I know a lot of farmers feel, which is this constant battle. You're out there on your own and there are, everything is against you. Everything is wanting to take that crop away from you, to a pretty amazing example there of the system working for you, with you.
Yes, it is. But I think of the words you just said, and I certainly agree with you. Most farmers feel that way, that the whole world's against it. But in this case, with pests, I'll never forget in 2012, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, the first time I heard him say, for every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 species that are beneficial or indifferent, meaning they won't help you or hurt you. Why do we focus on killing that pest instead of we should focus on providing the home and habitat for the beneficiaries? And I think that It's a mindset shift. I always say the greatest compaction on any farm or ranch is right between the ears. They have to look at things more holistically and realize that their farm is a direct reflection of them and their stewardship practices. So if we don't like it that our farm's not resilient, well, why is that? Are we not infiltrating our water? Do we not have enough carbon to hold that water to help us through those drier periods? Or do we not have soil aggregates built well enough to infiltrate water and our fields are flooding out? What's the cause? Chances are it's because of what we did. And we have to take ownership of that and realize that our management, or as I prefer to call it, stewardship, makes the difference.
As an advisor to so many farmers in America and around the world, how do you manage the risk involved in supporting people through changing practices, which, while they may be not working as well as they used to, so some of these, use of chemicals, the traditional tools of modern agriculture, they may not be working as well as they used to for these farmers. They may be on a sort of maybe on a slow decline, but at least they know how they work. They know if they see that pest species and they put that chemical out, most of the time it will deal with that problem. And you're advising them and supporting them through a transition where sometimes, more of the time, they may not need to reach for that tool. That's also a risky thing to be advising someone as well if their year's crop is potentially on the line, at least in their mind. And we often think about this at Soils for Life, where we're often sharing success stories. We know that there are also stories of failures along the way, even if ultimately we end up in success. How do you think about managing that risk when you're engaging with people?
Yeah, and that gets back to understanding and listening to each individual farm or family and what's their aversion to risk. Okay.
Mhm.
Are they risk takers? But then also financially, okay, can they take the risk? And then you work with them accordingly. And there are farms that, financially, they're on the edge, so to speak. So you have to take them at a slower pace to make sure the biology in the soil is working, make sure the natural nutrient cycle is working. So it is a tailor-made program to each individual farm. But in saying that, it's still moving them ahead on the journey. At their aversion to risk, what's that? And you have to take that into account. Now, I will say the way that we do it, it's really not very risky because it is walking them methodically through making sure where they are in the process, how's the energy cycle working, the nutrient cycle, the water cycle, where are they at? So that really takes a lot of the risk component out of it.
We often hear stories about farmers who've shifted after they've hit the wall economically, or they can see the cliff approaching.
Mhm.
Do you have thoughts about what can help people to reach a point of wanting and being confident to make a change before they hit the wall, catching them before they fall, so to speak?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot more of that where, let's be honest, any farmer who goes out and sprays a pesticide, they don't feel good about doing that. None of us want to handle chemicals, etc. They don't feel good necessarily about spraying, applying synthetic fertilizers. And so we're seeing many, many more individuals come saying, this just isn't right. I'm having to apply more and more to get the same yield, and it's with less profit. And they're wanting to make a change before it becomes critical for them to do so. And that's a
Mm.
good thing. Also, I think regenerative agriculture is really now becoming very well accepted in most areas. And so it's not like they're going to be the lone person out there like I was 30 years ago, starting down a path. There's a lot of people doing it so they can find comfort and they can find that network of others that are going through the same thing. That
Yeah.
that really helps to speed up adoption.
Are there particular examples of building community around soil health, around regenerative, that you think have been particularly effective? I read a little bit about the Burleigh County Soil Health Team, which sounds interesting, but that or other examples of where that peer mentoring, community support has worked really well.
When I was just in Australia last week, we did a workshop there. And at the end, the moderator asked those in the audience, there was about 250 plus people in the audience, what are they going to do and how are they going to carry this on? And it really was rewarding for me. And quite frankly, I was a bit surprised, but the number of people who said, well, we're part of this grazing group, we're part of a cropping group, we have this community, that community, and they started on their own. Sometimes it was according to the livestock or crops they were growing. Sometimes it was a given area, this valley or that valley, but they were forming those peer networks. And I just commended all of them because that's what you need when you run into a wall. You need that support group there. So there's a lot more out there than I ever thought there was. And that's a good thing.
Just zooming out again to the bigger picture, you mentioned this a little earlier, but the average customer, the average purchaser of food and fiber, whether that be a household or also, I would say, at the corporate level, although that may start to be changing a little bit, they don't really seem to think much or have much awareness about how food is grown and how important that is. What I observe is that there is some awareness of the importance of what foods you're consuming, but less about how it's grown. So there's this message out there about eating more vegetables, but is there a understanding of the difference between a vegetable grown in a regenerative way and a vegetable grown in a non-regenerative way? I don't see a lot of awareness of that out there. Do you see that changing?
Yes, and I agree with you. Right now, obviously, there's not the awareness out there that I would like. But in saying that, I've been in this space over 30 years. And the first 25 years, it was like we were trying to push a snowball uphill every day and every day. Then about 4 years ago, we really started seeing a change, COVID and post, about people wanting to know where their food comes from, wanting a better understanding of what it is they're putting into their mouths and the mouths of their children. And we started to notice a change then amongst brands and business wanting to source regeneratively grown and raised products. So it just kind of looked like this. And then it just went up at a really significant pace. And now the last year plus, it's just warp speed. And there's more and more and brands, etc. And I think the next phase of that then is the understanding that it's not just a vegetable we need to eat. It's where's that vegetable grown? How healthy is the soil that it was grown in? Is it free of chemicals? And if so, to what degree? I think that's the next step that's coming and can't come fast enough as far as I'm concerned.
And what you're seeing is revolving around this concept of regenerative agriculture and that language specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. 4 or 5 years ago, you didn't hear about regenerative agriculture very much. But boy, it's picked up significantly. Now you can't pick up a farm publication, tune in on a radio station where they're not talking about regenerative agriculture. And that's a good thing. That's why I'm so confident that it's only going to continue to increase at an exponential rate.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's specifically the connection between this concept of regenerative agriculture and the health and nutritional value of the food that is the secret sauce to driving that change in people's attitudes towards food.
Well, I think that's a very, very important part of it. And I think it should be a main driver. But I really look at regenerative agriculture as finding common ground for common good. I think as a society, us humans, we can agree on 85% of the issue. We all want clean air. We want clean water. We want the farms to be profitable. We want to revitalize rural communities. We want nutrient dense food. Why don't we come together and work on those 85% of the things, and the other 15% will sort itself out? Let's not focus our time there. And so I spend the majority of my time now talking to CEOs, heads of sustainability, board of directors who are interested in regen ag. Okay. First thing I do is I try and find their pain point. What are they mainly focused on? Is it climate change, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, moving it back into the soil cycle? I'll come at it from that approach then. Is it clean air, clean water? Is it farm profitability? For many of these brands, it's sourcing a resilient supply of high quality product. I'll approach it from that angle then. And if it's consumer driven, I'll approach it from the nutrient density. Fact of the matter, though, is it's always going to come back in my mind to regen ag, because regen ag can, at least in some part, address all of these issues.
Just coming back to Brown's Ranch, your son Paul has, as you said, taken on the stewardship of the property and the business. How did you approach succession planning, and what have been some of the biggest lessons from that process? Because it sounds like it's gone pretty well.
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit further than that. And my wife and my own story. My wife has two sisters, no brothers. And so her parents didn't really have anyone to transition the farm to as far as a son. And none of the three daughters were really interested. So they asked me, once I joined the family, would I be interested? Of course, I was all eager, my wife not so much. But we spent the next 8 years farming alongside them, thinking that we were going to be able to buy the whole farm. And then one day they called the three sisters in and they said, we're going to sell each of you a third of the farm. Now, we were fortunate in that we were able to buy the home place with the house on it. But essentially what that meant is the rent we paid my wife's two sisters was enough to make their land payments. So they never had to pay anything for the land. We essentially had to pay for the whole thing, but only got a third of it. So that was a very important lesson to us. Now it's worked out well. We've been able to lease their properties from them. So I'm not complaining about that, but it was a very important lesson because I didn't want our son or daughter to go through that whole thing where they come back to a farm, spend years putting sweat equity into it, then all of a sudden, hey, by the way, you're not going to be able to purchase the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we made up our minds, my wife and I, early on, that we knew our son Paul wanted to come back to the ranch. He never even wanted to go to college. We kind of forced him to, just to get him off the ranch for a while. Our daughter didn't have the interest that he had. So what we did while he was at the university, we sat down with both of them and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the land in a trust. Paul will be both the executor of that trust and the beneficiary. So as long as my wife and I are alive, we're entitled to some income off that land if we so choose, in the form of rent or a crop share or whatever the case may be. Paul knows that when we pass, the land is his. Okay, he gets it all. Now, what we did for our daughter then, we took out life insurance policies on my wife and I. She's the beneficiary of those. Plus, we have other investments and, another house here, and she gets that. So is it equal? No, the farm's still worth much more. But Paul invested the time working alongside us, helping us build that. So he should get more. Both of our children are perfectly fine with it, and it's working out very well.
And it sounds like Paul is taking a very similar approach, extending on the approach that you pioneered. So, how did that happen? Was that just a natural, organic thing, or were there conversations about that? How did that wonderful outcome occur?
Yeah, and realized, let me tell you this. So, Paul, his graduating high school class was about 350 students. Okay. Fairly large school system. There was approximately 50 of the 350 that were directly involved in farming or ranching. In other words, their parents owned a farm or ranch. Today, to our knowledge, Paul is the only one that's actively farming and ranching. I find that tremendously sad, but I also put the blame of that on the parents because they must not have made it conducive. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every child who grew up in a farm or ranch has to go back to farming and ranching. No, should be their choice. But you can't tell me of the other 49, none of them wanted to. Well, what it tells me is those parents were involved in a production model that the child wanted no part of. Whereas Paul, he saw what we were able to do ecologically. He saw financially that, yes, this is viable. It's hard work, but you can make a living at it. And so we made it conducive for Paul to come back. Now, Paul continuing this regenerative journey, he doesn't know anything else. Paul Brown has never tilled the soil. He's never applied a pesticide. He's never applied a fungicide. He doesn't understand how to operate anything but regeneratively. And also, it's successful. Why would he want to change? You know?
Mm, mm. And beyond your own family, how do you see the next generation of farmers stepping into regenerative agriculture? What do they most need to succeed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And realize for 25 years, we ran an internship program on our ranch where we'd bring in a number of interns every growing season to help us. And as we worked with those young people, one of the first things I would tell them is don't go in debt. Every young person thinks, oh, I want to own a farm. And then what do? They end up maybe spending too much, purchasing a farm in a location that really isn't suitable for what they want to do. I said, no, what you need to do is find out what you enjoy, what you're good at, and what can be profitable. Okay. And then you start growing that operation and you expand based on your profits. Don't go borrow a lot of money to do this. And what you will find is opportunities will open up for you. Someone in the community will say, hey, that person needs a chance. I'm going to help them out. And then you move to that opportunity. Then there may be another one as you move up. At the right point in time, you will know, okay, financially, I'm able to buy land. Here's where I want to be. Yes, I found a mate here, so we want to be located here. Okay, then it's time. But you have to grow as your knowledge expands, as your customer base expands, and as opportunities arise.
Well, Gabe, thank you so much for all the work you do and for taking the time today to be part of the Soils for Life podcast. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
This episode was hosted by me, Ellie Court, and produced by Soils for Life and the Grow Love Project. Head to the Soils for Life website to find out more about our work. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to rate and review our podcast. Every review helps to make our podcast easier for others to find. If you have feedback or suggestions of people or topics we should cover, you can reach us at info@soilsforlife.org.au. Thanks for listening.